Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. We're here every day at 3 p.m. to keep you interested and growing and enthusiastic about art. Today you're going to be really enthusiastic because we've got a terrific one about painting from photographs with the great Shelby Keefe.
Hi, I'm Shelby Keefe. I'm really happy to be in the studio today to show you some of my techniques and to show you some examples of how you can make good paintings from photographs. You've probably heard that it's almost impossible to make a good painting from a photograph, and if so, that it's really difficult to do that. Well, I'm going to show you in this video some techniques and some tricks that I've used and developed through the years, and I'm really excited to share those with you. So I've got lots of examples and of how I've made some paintings from photographs that I've taken through the years, showing many different subject matters, lots of different ideas. So let's take a look at those. So a very important thing that I've come to find out to make good paintings from photographs is to actually paint from life. And you may know that I do a lot of plein air painting, and perhaps you have gone out in the field and done a lot of plein air painting. I think I'm a better painter from my photographs if I have the practice painting outside. So I'll have an example for you in a moment that shows the photograph, the plein air painting, and then a studio piece that I made from the plein air piece. And this is what I have for you. I did these bee boxes down in Apalachicola area, and the top photo that's the actual photo of the situation, and then the piece right down here, that's the plein air study that I did. And then I was challenged with the task of making a large studio piece from a plein air painting. And so this third piece right here, which is 24 by 48, quite a bit larger than the original 10 by 20 plein air piece, that one is the resulting painting from looking at the photo, but also looking at the plein air painting. So I find that having the experience as a plein air painter has added to my ability to make good paintings from photographs, because I've been able to go out in nature and see what happens with atmosphere. In a photograph, you might have distance in your photograph and it looks the same value as something that's close to you. Or it just looks relatively kind of black or kind of dark, you know. So the best challenge, what I have found and what I have learned is that when I'm outside and I'm looking at distance, there's atmosphere between me and that subject that's way in the distance. And I've learned to paint that in plein air by adding blues and make it a little bit purple, gray it back, and it pushes your distance, pushes your background. And so that has been really key for me. When I go and I did these bee boxes, I also exaggerate color. So I was standing there in front of these bee boxes. There's lots of bees buzzing around. It's a little scary. But I'm standing there and they're just too irresistible. I needed to paint them. And I see that in real life, those bee boxes have color, lots of color. And when I'm out there, I don't think, oh, subtle color, that's a little subtle. I usually just get right in there and paint bright. So this small plein air study that you see in my side-by-side, you can see that it's actually quite a bit brighter and has a lot more energy than the photograph. And the photograph is, of course, what I saw when I was there. So that just gives you another idea how when you get a photograph and you have to make a painting from a photograph, that any little hint of color that you see in that photo, you get to exaggerate that. You can make it brighter and more exciting. And so this one example where you can see all three, the photo, the plein air study and the finished piece, you can see how I was able to take all the elements from the real scene and make it into a compelling, larger piece with the bright colors from the plein air. And yet there's a little bit more detail and strength in it because I had the photograph to refer to. So that was just my first example for you. I have another one. And this one is a blue barn in rural Wisconsin. I painted this from the photograph. I did not do a plein air of this one, but because I had my years and experience painting outside and I know what happens with distance, it just somehow atmosphere makes those trees in the background become more bluish, purplish. They're still sort of dark, but there's a nice pushing back of values in that. And so in this piece, I'm showing you that example specifically, how in the woods behind that barn, in the photo, it's the tree in the foreground is a little darker, which makes sense, and then the trees behind it are a little bit lighter, but I wanted to punch that up. I get to do that because I'm the artist. So you see in the painting, there's that dark tree, and then I pushed those woods back with more blues, and I added some whites, and you'll see when I do the demo how I mix greens to push them back and stuff like that. In here you can see how I made this it's a better painting than it is a photograph. So that's that example. And you can also see in the barn how I've tweaked the color. I've made the color a little bit more interesting, a little bit brighter. Also in the driveway, the gravel in the driveway is not just beige, dark beige, shadow beige. I sort of made it into a purple. It's more of a purple shadow. I like to, things that tend to be brown and gray, I like to put more color in it. So that's what you get to do when you have your photograph. You don't have to stick with that dull brownish gray. You can make it a color. And I actually take what I see in my photo, and if there's just a hint of some kind of color that gives me the idea, that's how I turn it into more of a color in the shadow. Again, the grass, I've exaggerated that too. That's a little bit more vivid than in the photograph. And in the roof, this is a very busy barn roof. It's rusty. It looks like a tin roof of some kind. And instead of worrying about all that little detail in that roof, I have gone and just suggested some of that, some of the rust by just brushwork, a little bit of brushwork and tinting the color. So that's that example. On to the next one. This one is a pretty exciting piece. I generally like to paint buildings and do things with structure and hard objects. But this is Door County during cherry blossom time, and that's pretty beautiful, exciting time of the year for Door County. And I actually did this painting from this photograph as a demo for one of my classes. And I didn't really know how I was going to approach this, but I did know that I wasn't going to paint every single little blossom and every little branch and every little blade of grass. So what I like to do then is to squint down at my photograph and try to see the shapes, the overall general average shapes of color in the photograph. So that's why I found that this, as the tree comes around, it seemed to be a little darker. And for some reason, I was seeing purple in there. And I made it like a big shape of purple. And then that created the mass of the blossoms. And then on the other side where the light is hitting the cherry blossoms, again, it's a mass of color. And then I would add brushwork just to say, yep, I meant to do that. Yep, there's a blossom there, just a few to give you the dance. So that's the quick explanation for how that happened. I'm going to be doing, when I do my demo for you, I'll be doing some tree and some leaf action, so you'll get to see how I actually tackle such a detail as trees and branches and things like that. My next example, side-by-side, photo and painting, is a painting I'm really happy with that I just finished recently. And what I found that I I needed to do for myself, since it was a photograph that I took in a moving vehicle or walking, I can't really remember, it was in Cuba. The angles, you know, perspective is what perspective is, but if you're sort of straight on, it's still not going to be a nice looking perspective. So you can see my photo, I have that just tilty angle where the perspective is just going off slightly, and I think that's a little troubling. So I decided to straighten it out and see if I could just make it a really nice straight on image. I actually have a little sketch that I did before I tackled this subject, because it's pretty complicated and I wanted to make sure I was going to like the idea or the decision to straighten everything out. So here's my little sketch, and what I did was I just roughly decided as a composition how was that going to work. And I liked the shapes of the dark areas, and I liked the feeling and the flow of that. So I made the decision to go right ahead and make that painting happen, straightening out the angles. You can do that too if you're out there taking photographs of your favorite building or anything that has structure and you're not quite sure you like the angle. You can straighten that out. You get to do that because you're the boss. So the next piece I have is another architectural piece where I chose not necessarily to straighten the angle, but what I did was I exaggerated color to pretty wide, you know, spectrum. So this building, which is in Chicago, was kind of a creamy building, and it was in the shadows. Pretty exciting to me. I wanted to get more urban, real urban, gritty stuff, and this one really, I was motivated by it. So, but I changed quite a few things. I exaggerated the color, number one, and that's why this example I think is best. Instead of it being that sort of whitish beige, I made it more yellow. And in the shadows, I made it more of a greenish yellow, more exciting. There was an awkward shadow in there in the photograph, which I just eliminated. It wasn't going to help being in there. And, you know, just created more color and activity in it. And the size of the windows changed a little bit. Some of it happens just as you go along, and it seems like it might be an accident, but it works out for better. So this was a fun one to do, and I think it's a more exciting result than the actual photograph. One thing I want to encourage you, though, I'm talking about taking your photograph and making it into a good painting, but you're going to have better luck if your photos are good. A lot of times people come to my classes and they bring a photo that's printed out with really pale ink. It might be super busy. It might be just a bad quality photograph. Start out with giving yourself the advantage of getting a really good print of your photo. I think that's more important than even, you know, the subject matter is make sure your photograph is got good color, relatively good color, and contrast, using good printer paper. So that's a quick little tip for you. So this next side-by-side here is of a scene in Sedona, Arizona, and a really awesome barn that was just not being used with a cathedral rock in the distance. But I wanted to make it fit a square format, and I also wanted it to work with the place. So it's called Crescent Moon Ranch, and there was a moon up, but the moon was not actually where I have it. The moon was actually way over somewhere else. So I thought, well, that's okay. I can do a little something magic in Photoshop. So what I did was I took, matched the blue. You know, not everybody can do Photoshop, but you can certainly make that up without having Photoshop. Took the moon, placed it over there, and extended the sky. So you could just actually see, you know, have your photo and do a sketch with that too. You wouldn't really have to be a Photoshop master to do this, but I like it. I like to make things easy for myself, so that's what I did. And then, of course, the painting is, which is called Crescent Moon Ranch, then shows the depth of sky and the moon, which I made a little bigger just to give it a little more drama. And in the photo, the mountain range, the Cathedral Rock mountain range, and the trees behind it were a little bit too much the same. I didn't like how it was the same height. It hit at about the same place as the top of the roof. So I shrunk it a little bit, as well as the greenery behind it. And that's another way I made that the painting better than the photograph. I believe I also pushed it back a little bit with atmosphere and lightened up some of those shadows that are in the mountain, so it would, you know, give you the illusion that it's back farther. My next example is kind of a interesting one, a little bit more different. Placement is the issue here. I have this great photo that I took down in Wickenburg, Arizona, of ropers who were getting ready to do their thing and rope cows and stuff like that. I did it for a show, a cowgirl up there, and it's a very complex scene, and they moved around a lot, but I took a bunch of pictures. So I have that photograph, and I didn't like how evenly spaced they were. They were too evenly spaced, and there's a kind of a going downhill thing happening here. So I felt like I really needed to reposition my characters. And so I printed this just basically cheap piece of paper for tracing purposes. And what I did was I traced and moved characters around, tried to decide if I wanted these guys way back. I actually wanted to keep the three main characters there because I liked their kind of like conversational positioning here. It was the other three that weren't quite right. And as I went along, I'm just tracing. You can do that, get your tracing paper, to see if you like, you know, separating them and stuff. So here's a sketch of bringing them out. So after playing around with composition in this layout, and it wasn't quite working for me, in here I separated the farthest figure, and I thought, well, that could work, but then it's 3, 2, 1. I wasn't quite sure I liked that idea. So then what came to me is, through this tracing technique, is separate the middle character. And that's what I have here. The middle character is kind of on its own. You got your three main guys, your middle character, sort of aloof and alone, and then the two people on the other end, which are having their own conversation. And then I think it became a more engaging composition and layout. So that's what you get to do when you're the master of your painting. So I'm happy with how that turned out. In fact, the middle character is no longer a man either. I made it into a woman. So we can change our photographs to, you know, change the gender too. So my next example is a very complicated piece. This is a scene in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I live. I was given the challenge of making a painting that says human industry. And we're doing a lot of building in Milwaukee. And the scene is extremely busy. And I knew I didn't want to have to deal with every little bit of detail and stuff, but what I wanted to play up were all the cranes and the structures and the sort of, it's going off in crazy directions. And I also had a canvas that was 34 by 46, I believe, 36 by 48. And it wasn't quite the right proportion as my photograph either. So I have added ground on this one. So I've added more depth to the bottom of it. I've added more cars. And I simplified it greatly. So if you take some time to really study the two side by side, you'll see what I did to make it a better painting from the photograph. My next example is a harbor scene. Again, very busy, lots of lines, busy, 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 and I'm not interested in spending a lot of time on detail. But what I was interested in was the rhythm of all the masts and all the line and everything. So I made this happen pretty fast. I didn't give myself time to study each little line. And I just created a really quick drawing and then did my my paint in and around the drawing. And you'll see some of that technique later on, how I start out with an underpainting and a line drawing and then paint up to and around that. But that's how that one turned out. This one, this is a crazy, wonderful underside of our overpasses in Milwaukee. It's very, very artful. I look at this infrastructure in our town and I look under it and it's like a great abstract. I look at these as, this could make a great abstract painting. But I took it, into more of I couldn't resist being realistic with it. But I did exaggerate color, you can see in here. The grass is greener, I have blue sky. Just kind of did what I love to do most, and that's make an image, make a good painting from a photograph that's exciting to me, but that needs a little work. And this next one is a window scene, kind of a twilight window scene, which I didn't change a whole lot from the photograph, but what I did was, in the photograph there's this blue like on the side, and I just took the blue out. It wasn't, the blue didn't work for me, and so I just lightened it up and created a nice little warm inside scene. And then this painting, here's another side-by-side example of a typical scene in industrial big towns. That's Milwaukee again. Late light, trying to create more drama with that. I exaggerated color. I also made where the sun is kind of peeking underneath that train trestle. I created kind of a halo that you kind of see in a photograph, but I just played it up some more. Again, trees, I didn't deal with every little branch, but I did some suggestions of the trees in there, and then created more drama in it with color. I also changed the graffiti to have my initials in it. You can do that too. So my next example is another very busy urban landscape scene in Milwaukee, and it basically is taking a scene that was pretty dull and a little bit gray, and just pumping up the color, juicing the color. This next scene is, again, it's Milwaukee. I guess I live there, so I'm showing a lot of Milwaukee. Very grainy photograph, but I just loved all the lights and the reflections and the excitement of the scene. So I just exaggerated the contrast in it, gave it a little bit more color, and created more of a reflection and a sort of a flat feeling of the water. And if you stop your video, you can actually get the two of them together and see the difference in how you can really play up a kind of a crappy photo and make it into a really magical painting. My next example is good old Wisconsin barn. This was a really fun one to do too. So this is late light, and in the photo you can sort of see the hints of the late light happening on the barn and hitting, the sun is setting and you can see it hitting the poles, the telephone poles, and in the distance you can see it sort of scraping the snow. All I needed was those hints to go and make the painting just be a lot more of what I just said. Just an exaggeration of everything. And then I think that it's now saying what I saw in the photograph. I'm just giving it the juice and giving it more by intensifying the color and leaving the underpainting showing through. You'll see that throughout in my examples. The underpainting does a lot toward making your painting from a photograph be more exciting. I have another example for you that shows trees, blossoms, and neighborhood scenes. I love painting neighborhood scenes. So this one is a scene in Milwaukee, a little neighborhood, and we had an early spring, so we have magnolia blossoms and forsythia in it. So how do you paint that? Well, here's my photo, and then the painting, which is below it. I stretched it out a little bit, gave it a little bit more of a 1:2 proportion, and you can see how again, with the blossoms, I've made bigger shapes. They're not like little itty-bitty individual blossoms. bigger shapes. And then the forsythia has that nice top lighting. So again, you see the house in that photograph. It's kind of a blue, doesn't really show very well. But look at the painting then. I put a lot more blue in it because I thought it needed more life. So I just took that little hint of color that I saw in the photo and just juiced it up, pumped it up a little bit more. Same with the yellow house, gave that more color. The flag, I've made the flag look like it has a little bit more like sun hitting it. And the trees, you'll see the trees have the underpainting is kind of showing what the trees are doing too. In there, you get to see that orange underpainting creates the branches, and I'll be doing a lot of that. I'll be talking to you about that in the demo on how you can let your underpainting do a lot of your talking as well. My final example is a really interesting one. It's a very detailed photograph of Cuba, when I was in Cuba, and there is infinite amount of detail in that. So I actually did this as a demo for one of my classes last year, and so I have a grouping of 3. The first is the actual photograph, and the top one is the demo that I did, and then the bottom one is my improvement on the demo by using Photoshop. So the mistake I made in here was not simplifying enough. So in my example, my finished painting in the demo, I had too many values going on and just kind of did a little bit of dancing around and jumping around. And I thought, I can improve on that, but I don't know how to improve on that. So what I did was I actually took areas in this composition, took the areas, the wall that is facing the sun, even though there wasn't any sun, that's why it was so busy, there wasn't any focal area. I actually lightened that whole side. And you can do this in sketches. You can actually take a photo with your tissue paper and put it under there and sketch your values in there. I think we're going to talk a lot about values, and we're going to talk about sketching and preparing before we get started. But in this case, this painting I did of Cuba was disappointing to me because I kept thinking, oh, I could have done a better job on that. So let me see how I could make a better painting out of it. So I lightened that one side, I darkened the other side, and then all of a sudden the main subjects, the car, which is the main subject, and the people in it, which were a lot darker, they popped out like they were supposed to. So just letting you know that even after you're done making a painting, you can improve on it. And sometimes it takes doing it and seeing what you maybe could do better, and then doing another painting of it. Maybe don't try to fix that painting, but do another one using a value study and playing around with that. Those are my examples for you, and now I'm going to get out the photo that I'm actually going to paint for you in the demo. I've now put up the photograph that I'm going to be painting for you in this demo. I'm really excited about it. It's a photograph of my backyard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it just means a lot to me. And those cute little metal chairs, and that's my garage and trees. And the reason why I'm choosing this photograph to demo for you today is there's a lot of elements in there that I can help you understand how to paint. So there's trees. I mentioned that before, how do you paint trees and not do all the leaves. There's a building. Now there isn't a lot of perspective involved, but there's some building issues I'll talk about with you. There's color. I've got those 2 little chairs, which is the surface area that'll be fun to paint. I'll show you how I do that. And there's color exaggeration that I can help you with. There's actually a building behind, right above the roof of the garage. There's actually a building back there which has almost disappeared in the photograph. So I'll play that up a little bit more. But first of all, I think you might know that I use a bright acrylic underpainting, and that's going to be the first thing that I show you. And you'll also see throughout how the underpainting is what really helps kind of a boring photo create a better painting with some beautiful color shining through. So I'll be talking at length with you and showing you why I choose the colors that I do to go underneath the certain areas and how that color can work for you. I like to do bright underpaintings because they do a lot for me in my finished paintings. What's really fun about doing an underpainting before you even get started on using your oils is it's a way to free up. So what I'm going to do is free up a little bit here, but first I have to put my acrylic paint out. I'm using acrylic because it's going to be dry by the time I go to put my oil paint on top. And then it'll stay dry and it won't pick up. So I'll talk to you about the colors that I choose, which are basically using the complement of the end result color. So I've got all my colors out, and there's really only the primaries that I put out for my acrylic because I don't need a whole wide range. Basically, I am going to be putting rough estimates, very rough, very washy acrylic paint on my canvas to get rid of the white. And I guess I should address that because why would you get rid of the white when you could just start painting your subject right on a white canvas? Well, my bright underpainting ends up being a way to get rid of that intimidating white canvas and also it's like warming up. I want to keep my painting free. I want to be, loose and have nice brushwork. Don't want to get all tight. So this is a good way to just get in there and throw some paint down. So I am using my acrylic on the orange is going where the sky is, and in my photograph you'll see there's just a little bit of sky in the corners, and it kind of shows through the tree a little bit as well. So I'm just, very, very thin paint, pretty watery, and approximately just the approximate positioning of where my subject is going. I don't want to worry about hard edges in this underpainting part. This is very soft. No hard lines at all. Just soft getting rid of the white in the general areas of my subject. So this patch of color I'm doing right here is the green tree that's sort of cascading down like that. That's why that's taking a shape like that. And I'm going to bring it, dipping it in my water over here. I'm going to stick a little blue in there to make it purple, because where it's darker in the eaves of the garage, I'm going to go ahead and make a darker purple. It doesn't have to be one or the other color, but I can shift the color. And I'm having fun with this, and I'm loosening up. So my whole idea of doing an underpainting is not just to get rid of the white, it's to just get you to feel like you're ready to make a great painting. And I just really like this part. Just gets my attitude right, gets me warmed up. And I think what I'll do is I'll change that color a little bit, just so that it's not just orange and red. It's going to also have a little bit of blue in it. And I'll choose the areas by the tree where there's some warmth. So now I'm going to just switch it out and put a little blue in there for a little change of pace. And I'm not going to worry about those little chairs. I'm not going to paint those little chairs in the underpainting. There's no like, here's a chair and here's a chair. I don't want to get too fussy at this stage. This is my loosening up stage. Very loose. Warming it up a little bit here. You see, I'm not spending a lot of time either. I'm not taking hours to do this. I'm not thinking very hard either, because really, it doesn't really matter what the color of your underpainting is. It honestly doesn't matter. I could just do a rainbow from orange into reds into blues into purple, just a gradation. All I would need is a gradation of color, and that would make a nice underpainting. You could just do one color underpainting. You could just do red, which I've seen done, or just that warm orange. That works too. I just like to put more thought into why and where I'm putting these colors, because you get the colors. You will get much more unexpected results, things you cannot predict that will happen in the end when you finish with your subject. I will be making a point of talking about why I'm doing this and giving you an example why the underpainting is working. I will also show you how doing an underpainting can also create problems for you too. So I'll address that with you as well, because as you can see, it's pretty bright, and sometimes an underpainting becomes a distraction. So I'll also teach you how to minimize distractions, especially if you have that in a focal point that kind of takes your eye away from the purpose of the painting. But for now, I think we have a pretty good underpainting. It's fun, and I'll let it dry. It'll only take a few minutes to dry. And in the meantime, I will talk about my colors on my palette. So I've got my underpainting done, and it's drying right now. But I think I'm going to talk to you about why I use a complement. The complementary color underneath the finished resulting color. When you think about a complement, it's the opposite on the color wheel. So you have the color wheel, which starts out with your primary colors. You have your red, yellow, and your blue, and then the opposite color on the wheel of that is what's called the complement. And they call it a complement, I guess, because those two colors together complement one another. They create a kind of natural vibration. The two colors together do this really interesting thing where it excites your eye. It gets you excited. It creates a nice juxtaposition of color. And so when I use the complement of the resulting color, even if there's just a little piece of that showing up, even if there's just a little, like a scumble, a dry brush over the complement of the acrylic paint on there, you'll see this sparkle that you can't predict, and that's what makes this technique so much fun to play with. So complementary color underpainting in approximate position of where your subject matter is going. Nothing perfect, just approximate. In my sample here, in my photo that I'm using, there aren't a lot of really solid shapes. Like if I were doing a painting of a barn and that barn was red and it was one solid thing, I would do kind of a bluish green complement in that area. A nice, a soft edge, nothing too hard and nothing too solid, but at least I'd have a big mass. I'd mass in the complement, the turquoisey green color for the barn, and then in the background, if I had a strip of woods, I would have a really rough strip of reddish quality underpainting for the complement behind the woods, and vice versa. Kind of like, I'm just switching it around. The sky, if it's blue, I would have a light orange complementary color underpainting for that. So that's your quick lesson on underpainting, and just know that there's no mistakes with underpainting. You can't make a mistake with an underpainting because it's just fun. I do it because it's more fun for me to paint on color than to paint on white. And I also feel like I don't have to work so hard to finish a painting if it already has a color on it. If I had a white canvas and I'm doing my painting using all my realistic oil colors, I feel like I'd have to cover every square inch. This way with an underpainting, I can leave it go. I can have the edges be really free and there's all this fun sparkly stuff around the edges. I can put a broad brush stroke down and there might be some underpainting showing on either side. That might stay like that. So, but I don't ever really know until I'm going into the painting and I see how it's working. Sometimes, you can always paint over an underpainting if there's too much. I have a nice variety of oil paints here, and I'm going to go through each one of them with you so that you know what I use. There are no real rules on how many paints you put out, how you lay them out, but I think it's very important to do the same thing on your palette every time so that you're able to predict and know where to go, and you get it into a good groove with that if you know your paint's always in the same place. So I happen to start out with my lighter colors on the right hand side, and then I come around in rainbow order to my darkest dark. So ignoring this one for now, which is a radiant color, light blue, we'll start here with titanium white. I use a lot of that, but not too much. Then I have a cad yellow light, a cad yellow deep, which is kind of like a school bus yellow, kind of a nice in between here. And then I have a cadmium orange, cadmium red light, quinacridone red, which is a really awesome, brilliant color, free of any yellows, anything that would make it warm. It's kind of a cool red, and lots of pigment. Then I have my alizarin crimson, which is a great darker red, very cool. Then I have what's called transparent earth red, a wonderful dark brown that's transparent. It's not. It'll tint things really nicely. But that's the only brown I ever put on my palette. Then I have a manganese blue hue, which is great for skies and mixing to make some wonderful greens. I have an ultramarine blue, which is my go-to blue for making lots of color because it's not super heavy duty on pigment. It's got a lot of bulk, and I really like that as well, and it's dark. This one happens to be phthalo turquoise. I got away from using just regular phthalo blue because it was so strong, and it was kind of pointless because I had a Prussian blue over here which has phthalo blue in it. So I used the phthalo turquoise to influence things on more of a turquoisey, brilliant blue. I don't use a lot of it, but I have it there in case I need it. And then a Prussian blue, which is my darkest dark, and I use that a lot in making my my darkest values. So it looks almost black on here, and you can see how it's important that I do lay these out the same way every time, or I could confuse this turquoise with this Prussian blue really easy. They look the same. Whereas up in here, you can see the differences quite nicely. So that's how I set up my palette. Usually I have a smaller palette than this wonderful one I have here in the studio, but I still wanted to arc it because this is how I set it up on my plein air easel palette and in my studio palette. I set it up this way where it kind of comes around the side. So in keeping with my usual way I operate, that's why I set it up like this. In here, this little cap right here, there's a little painting medium in that, and you'll see me dipping into that on a regular basis, but not, just dipping in here and there, not a lot of it. And this painting medium is a product that Gamblin makes that's a non-solvent oil painting medium. So it uses vegetable oil with a drying resin in there to help my paint dry just a little faster. But what I like about using a painting medium, and there's a lot to choose from out there, is that it thins your paint without making it runny. Like if I used, a thinner, a solvent to thin my paint, then it does thin the paint, but the paint will dry kind of chalky. It doesn't keep a shine. And why I really love painting medium is that this in particular, when my painting is dry, it still looks shiny. And that's important to me because then it still looks fresh. And I think that's really why I like painting, because I like how fresh it is and how juicy it looks. So I'll be dipping into that a lot. What else do I have here? Brushes. Well, I got my choice of brushes here. I like to have lots of choices. So I use, I'm not sure I have a favorite necessarily. In the past, I used to love a filbert. A filbert is like this one. It has a little round top, but it's flat. If you turn it, it's thinner. So it's got the ends are rounded, and yet it's flat. So that's a filbert, and the difference is how the brush mark. What is it? What's left on your canvas when you put a loaded brush mark on there? This will have a rounded tip, whereas something like this will have a boxy, a square brush mark. It'll leave a square on there. So that's really the difference between the two, is what the brush mark ends up looking like on your canvas, on your painting. I also use a round brush for drawing, and I'll be getting into that with you real soon here. I've got a few small rounds. I end up really scrubbing them into these beautiful pointed little things that look like a pencil almost, and I can draw really nicely with this round, nicely sculpted bristle on this. I have a few because I do run through them quite a bit. Brushes are kind of one of those consumable items, so always get more brushes than you think you need because, well, they stop behaving after a while, and then you just get a new one. But as you can see, I have lots of choices, and I'll be pulling from this pile of brushes in my decision-making process as I go along. I try to think about using the largest brush for the job. So when I look at an area to paint on my canvas, I say, okay, that's a pretty big area, so I think I'll use a somewhat big brush for that area. And so I go and I pick one that I can get the most done the quickest, largest brush possible for the job. But then, of course, when you get into your focal point areas, the areas that are more important, then it's nice to bring your size back down smaller so that you're not, making a mess. But hopefully I won't make too much of a mess for you here today, but we'll find out. So my first step after my underpainting is dry, and it's still a little bit wet. Might have to wait a couple more minutes, but while it's drying, I can show you what I do, and this is very important for me. And I would like to encourage all of you to practice drawing, because my next step is I'm going to take this image and I'm actually going to draw what I see there on here with dark paint. I'm not going to use chalk or pencil or anything. I'm just going to get right in there with some dark paint. You might have noticed that I didn't put any green out. I don't have any black out, so I mix all of those. There's an infinite variety of greens you can mix just from your yellows and oranges, even some of these reds in with these blues. And you'll see a lot of green mixing today because I've got a lot of green in my subject here. But I mix my own black too. So I take my main black is this Prussian blue, which is very seriously dark. And that's my darkest blue. I take my darkest yellow, which is roughly this brown is a dark yellow. So we're just going to call it my yellow primary. And then I take my darkest primary red, and that's alizarin crimson. And I mix it all up, and I'm making a very potent dark. Now, if you put more of the Prussian blue in it than the alizarin crimson or the brown, it's going to have a blue tint, and that's okay. Obviously, if I put more of the alizarin crimson, it's going to have kind of a dark red tint. Sometimes I hit it right on the dot, and it looks exactly black. But my intention is just to make a really nice dark that I can use to draw. And so I got that going on. Looks like that's done. And we might have to wait a couple more minutes for this to be dry. But what I use for my drawing is what I was mentioning before, the round brush. I have several to choose from. Choosing the right weapon is half the battle here. So I've got several really nice ones. I'm going to pull a couple of them out just so that I know if one doesn't feel right, then I can pick the other one without rifling through my bouquet of brushes here. And lots of choices. Better to have too many choices than not enough choices. All right. So when I start my drawing, there's a couple of ways to approach drawing. And if I had a photo that I was holding in my hand, I could divide up on the photo in halves to get like indications as to where the halfway point is, where the thirds are, and all that. In this case, I'm just going to go for it without that, but there's nothing wrong with you trying to grid things off. Just don't put too many grids in because that's more work than you need. But a couple of grids are kind of nice for you to give a guideline as to where to start your line work. So I've got my nice pile of black here. I'm going to grab some of this oil and just mix a little bit of the oil in it. It just gives it a little more flow. And set my... And now I've got my lovely pencil / paintbrush here. And I start out by getting a broad feel for division of space. So the building has an edge to it right here. So I'm looking at that and seeing what are the proportions from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, right there. And now I go and see, where does that end? That's about, I would have to say, right around in there. And I can start by putting a line, oops, wiggly as it is, there, kind of about where that edge of that building would go. I use this as a guide for my eye, my paintbrush against my photo. And I can see how that's going. There was a little perspective going on in that building. So I don't think I'm going to straighten this building out. You know how I showed you the building in Cuba where it was off kilter and I straightened it? In this case, I don't mind a little perspective in here because it's going to lead the eye to the main area. So that's going to be all right. I might even play that up a little bit. So I'm always looking at where the main divisions of space are in here. Just kind of get that figured out roughly. I'm not going to get too committed yet. So there's that. I also like to have a little paper towel handy. This is my eraser. Another reason why I like to use paint as my drawing and not pencil. Super easy to erase with a little bit of solvent as opposed to erasing with an eraser and a pencil, and it would be hard to see anyway on top of this underpainting. So just want to have a little less, that was a little heavy duty there, so I'll just go in here and reclaim that line there. And just start getting the main, I see this the line work in the approximation of where the tree branches sort of fall into this area here. And I've got a little bit of it ends here. So I'm not going to start doing any specific drawing on any tree, but I am getting areas at least spelled out a little bit here. I think that drawing is really important. For me, I really love drawing, and so I've always felt that drawing is important for a painting that has content that needs to be, you know, pretty much portrayed in a somewhat accurate way. So I spend a lot of time on my drawing. I think it's a good investment of your time to do that, because if you can get your drawing looking good and feeling good and it's right and it's accurate enough without being too super tight, then you have made your job easier for the whole rest of your painting. So it's like that. It's like a roadmap. Getting your drawing done is like having your roadmap that you can follow. So this is a little perspective thing. I'm just doing a little, this is my guideline, because things are coming like that. So I'm just claiming those angles here. And it's good to stand back too from your work while you're doing it. I usually don't stand back enough, but if you stand back, you can see what you're up to a little bit easier and get a sense for where you're going. The chairs are here. I'm not going to start those chairs yet, though. This is just really not. You see how I didn't draw each little pane yet in those windows. I didn't get all super specific because I'm not sure they're in the right place. I may change my mind as I get more drawing done. I might change my, placement. I might see, oops, that's a little big, or oops, that's too far over. So right now I'm just getting the basic shapes and areas planned out for my roadmap, which is my drawing. Just getting those in there. And now, since I'm painting from the photo, and this is all about making a better painting from a photograph, that you can make a good painting from a photograph. I want you to know that I'm not going to be a slave to this photograph, but if something's really working and I really like it, I'm going to follow it. So that means that this tree, which is actually a weed tree, this used to be it's my old backyard. I don't live there anymore, but that was a weed tree that just grew up, all by itself. I didn't put it there. Somebody cut it down years later, and I was really, really sad. And it came back so fast, it was like it was never really gone. Anyway, this weed tree has several, like trunks that come out. And in the photo, they're a little bit evenly spaced. Nature does provide for evenly spaced growth sometimes. And then as the artist, if I think it's a little bit too mundane, then I vary the spacing of the trees. I can do that because it's my painting, and I can decide how I want it to go. I can make it a better composition. I think that's really important, that we are always looking at improving what we're seeing here, making it a better composition if you can. So I've got these two trunks, and then these two. I don't want them to be the same, so I see I'm doing that. But what about if I just stick that one right here? That might throw it off a little bit so that we're not distracted by how similar. It's funny how human nature just wants to make things regular and evenly spaced. It's as much as I tell myself I'm not making that evenly spaced, I'm going, okay, move it then, and then there it is, evenly spaced again. So you really have to work hard at composing and getting yourself out of that pattern of regularity. Create a composition that's interesting and unpredictable. And that can actually be quite a struggle, but a good one. I like to keep learning. I don't think I'll ever be done learning. And so if I can make a more exciting composition by choosing to move nature around, then I'm going to do that. And that goes for plein air painting too. I move things around when I'm in plein air as well, maybe even more than when I'm painting from a photograph. So without getting too crazy on all the scribbling here, I'm going to make sure I'm doing okay for the rest of this. I might, see what I might do. See, that's a little wide. I am going to change my mind. I can do that. I have my eraser here. I'm going to just narrow that down a little bit more. I encourage you to work on your drawing and not be satisfied with the first go, unless it really is a genius brush stroke and a genius drawing, then keep it. But sometimes you can just make it better. And I decided, since this is an important thing to be here with you and do this demo, I'm going to make this better. So hopefully I'll be achieving that. I think it's a little better, a better division, and a little less wide. Everything was so wide. So let's see, maybe bend this one in a little bit. There's a branch that goes in there. I can erase. It's just so wonderful to be able to pull that up and not lose the color that I put on there for the underpainting. So I don't know if you noticed, when I took this eraser, I didn't bring it back to white, and that's why I used the acrylic. I'm bringing it back to the color. I've gotten rid of the dark that was maybe something I wanted to change, but I didn't take it back to the blank white of the canvas. So you can paint oil on top of acrylic, but you don't want to put acrylic on top of oil. That's the general rule to remember, because acrylic is basically like liquid plastic, and I think it would repel, let's see, you wouldn't want to put oil on, let's see, how do we do that? Getting myself mixed up here. Don't put acrylic on top of oil because it wouldn't stick well, and I don't think it's very archivally sound. I'm hoping that since this is a very thin coating of acrylic, I don't do really fat acrylic on here, just almost like a wash, that it's pretty solid, it's really intact. And that's why I do this, because when I erase my drawing, I still have my colorful underpainting. And it makes me happy to paint on color. I love painting color on color, and that's the main purpose, I think, of this, is that it gives me joy when I do it, and I like the results.
For over 100 years, artists have relied on photographs as a reference for paintings. But photographs lie. They make shadows too dark, they make skies too light, they show values incorrectly, and they misrepresent the colors you see in real life. Gallery owners and professional painters can walk into a room and point out which paintings were done from photographs. The key to painting from photos is to learn how to overcome the things that normally make paintings look like they are painted from photos, and to create more interest, more drama, and more color. Learning to paint what you see in a photograph is one of the most effective ways to improve your skills as an artist. Now you can create amazing paintings without fear of criticism for using photos, and discover the techniques to make great, lively paintings that are truly not just copies of photographs. In this all-new video, critically acclaimed artist Shelby Keefe shares with you all of her most effective techniques for creating beautiful paintings from photographs. You'll discover when to paint exactly what you see in a photo, and when you can run wild with your imagination and become more expressive in your work. How to create a musical sense of rhythm in the paintings you create from photographs. What you need to understand about color family values and how they affect the overall appearance of your final painting. You'll learn how to find the focal point of your composition and how to make it stand out for the viewer. You'll also discover how to simplify the entire painting process by using line work, to create an easy step-by-step roadmap to follow. 5 hours of techniques, a rare opportunity to learn from a highly sought-after artist. You'll gain valuable insights that will help you take your work to the next level, whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced painter. Painting from Photographs with Shelby Keefe is now available on video.
Well, that is Shelby Keefe, and the video is called Painting from Photographs. It's one of our best sellers, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com, where you'll find the entire video course. Plus, there's a special discount for you today only. If you put it in, the discount code can be found right up there in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview with Shelby Keefe. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine, and I'm proud to have Shelby Keefe with me today. Shelby, welcome.
Well, it's really good to be here. Thank you, Eric.
I'm so glad that you came in for this. I'm really curious. You know, it's been fun watching your career. We've known each other now for how long?
Well, I came to the very first plein air convention,
So
so I believe I met you then. I don't even know what year that was.
Well, it was about 6 years ago from when we're filming this. So.
Yeah.
Of course, if somebody's watching this 100 years from now, it's not 6 years. I'm fascinated by the way you paint. I'm fascinated with painting architecture, and I think architecture is one of the most difficult subjects to make it look right, you know, because of something about just perfectly straight lines doesn't work, even though it seems like it should. So I'm fascinated about that. But first, let's start out by kind of understanding how this whole art thing happened with you.
Okay. Well, I was one of those lucky kids where I came from a family of artists. My grandmother was an artist. My mother was an artist, and there was always art supplies. There was always things to make stuff with: crayons, paint, paper, anything anybody could ever want to do. We were always making stuff. So I just picked that ball up and ran with it, and I found at a very early age, probably maybe as early as kindergarten, that that was my favorite thing to do, was to draw and to paint and just be that artist.
Right. So your grandmother painted. Did you ever have adult conversations with your grandmother about painting?
Oh yes, often. Actually, my grandmother went outside and painted before they called it plein air painting. They went outside and painted. She had a teacher. But that all happened pretty much before I was aware of that kind of thing that she did. But she lived to be 99, and so she died in 2007. So I spent a lot of really great quality time with her as an artist, and she could see a lot of my growth as I matured and became a professional artist and a professional painter. So.
And do you have any of her artwork around?
I do, and she was a multimedia artist. She did a lot of different things. She did. She took pieces of linoleum and made mosaics out of it. She took tooled leather and did wood burning on it. All kinds of stuff, not just painting. They always had to make stuff out of, you know, any materials that was put in front of them, and that's my mom and my aunt and my grandma, and my grandpa was a great craftsman, so he provided the substrate that she could work with. So she didn't have to cut out the big wood form that all this stuff was going to be put on. But she said, "Sheridan, would you please do this for me? I need it this size and that size." And before you knew it, she had what she needed, and used a lot of glue and a lot of, sometimes toothpicks and glue and spray paint. And I mean, it was amazing, all the things that she had done. And I have some amazing pieces in my place right now that I'll always remember her by.
I think it's fascinating that she was actually going outdoors and painting Did you ever see any of her paintings?
Yes, my mom has all of those. My mom and my aunt, and they're wonderful. You know, there's some barns. You know, because they're from the rural Wisconsin, so there's some great barn scenes. Still life, you know, some of that too. So yeah, they're around. Those paintings are around. But I think her multimedia stuff was what she did as she aged, because you know, plein air painting isn't for sissies.
Well, so curious, how long did she continue to do art into her elder years?
Well, she was, even when she went into the healthcare facility, probably her last 14 years of her life, she always had scissors and was cutting and was drawing and was making things, even while she was in her comfortable one-room place where it was more than assisted living, but she just, and she had her beautiful things all around her. So she was just had what she needed and did what she wanted to do. And we were there for her when she needed something. We went and got it for her.
Oh, that's great.
My mom especially.
And your mom is also an artist. What does she do?
Mom does a lot of different things too. She helps with making graphics for church projects, crafting, but she's taken my classes, and she's a pretty good painter. She won't admit it, but I think she's a great painter, and so she's taken several of the classes, and she's got a nice body of work that she can now call her legacy.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So that'll be something. You have a couple of kids, right?
I do. I have 2 boys.
So that'll be something. They'll have something from Grandma.
Indeed, indeed.
So this art thing stuck with you at a young age, and then when did you make your first conscious decision that you wanted to follow this path?
Well, I know I had to be between 5 and 10 years old, because I remember where I was living when I said that, and I moved when we were 10, and we moved to a different place. So I just remember thinking, you know, I just really like to do this art thing. I bet I can someday be a commercial artist, because I think they make money. Commercial artists make money being artists, right? So I made that decision pretty early on.
So you went through high school, college. Did you do art courses in those places?
I did. In grade school even, that was my most favorite thing to do, was to find some way of well, luckily, when I was going to school, they had a lot of art. There was a lot of, you know, fun things involving art. So I just kept going for those things. In high school, we maybe didn't have a great art department there, but the teachers were always willing to let me do extra credit in art to make my other grades a little better. So I put art in my history classes and some of the other classes, whatever I could do to supplement my grades, and I was the go-to person to do design the poster for the whatever homecoming, whatever it was,
right.
You know, what high school kids do.
Right.
And then of course I was really set on going to college and getting a degree in art.
And where did you go?
I went to Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, did it in 4 years, and worked my tail end off, worked really hard. I had to take other classes though. I had to take history and math and English and all that stuff, which was a little less successful than the art classes, but I did what I could.
Yeah.
I wanted to make my dad proud, you know, because you don't make a living as an artist. That's what he thought.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that having that, still he supported me, you know. So I was motivated by that challenge of like, can you really make a living as an artist? No, you can't. Yes, you can make a living as an artist. And so I wanted to do really good in college and prove to my parents that their money wasn't going to go to waste, that I was going to really make something of it.
So you went to college, you finished up, and then what happens?
Well, after college, then you have to get a job.
Right.
You know, there's a little job happening before the end of college, but I went on, I had my mindset on working in the commercial art business, which meant graphic design, whatever it takes. And I went on job hunting, informational interviews, and I was told that's a good way to find out what's out there in the world. And being in Milwaukee, which is where I went to college, it's a big city, and there were a lot of ad agencies. So I just put out these letters saying, hi, I'm going to be graduating soon, and I'm looking to see what's happening in the world of commercial art. Can you maybe tell me what I should be doing as a young person coming out of college? And I put it that way to them in letters, and then I called them back and, said I was going to call. Then I called them. Then we made the appointment, and then I went to the appointment. Then I wrote thank you letters. It was very methodical. I was pretty smart. I don't know how that happened, but
Pretty good sense of marketing.
yeah. And eventually a connection came because one of those contacts said, hey, by the way, I have a friend who's looking to hire an entry-level artist at Gimbel's, which is the old department stores. I don't know if you remember Gimbel's. We had one in Milwaukee, and they were looking for a layout artist. So I got a job right out of college working downtown Milwaukee at Gimbel's in their advertising department, doing layouts with flare pens. So it was on a tissue pad, and I could use my drawing skills. They showed me what outfits I was supposed to draw on the model. So thankfully my figure drawing came in handy, and I had to just pretend that this is how the photographer was going to have to set the model up like this. There's those clothes. You spec your type, you rip off the layout, give it to the copywriter, and boom. So I did those one after the other, and I was so happy.
Yeah, great experience.
Yeah, it was.
And then you eventually did what? You continued to work at Gimbel's for a
Well,
while?
I worked there for about 3 years, and then, if you ever want to get a good pay raise, you got to just move on to another job. So I went from basically working in-house art departments for different companies in Milwaukee, for years.
And this was pre-computer.
Oh yeah, definitely pre-computer, yes. And if we talk about the computer, that was starting to come into play in the 90s, the late 80s and the early 90s. And I was fortunate enough to be able to learn on the job. So I did make the switch over to the computer at some point at one of my jobs and learned how to do layouts and spec type on the computer instead of what we used to have to do, which was kind of grueling.
Yes, I remember those days of having to wax things and cut them up and lay them out. And
Specking type, man, you get that wrong, you have to send it back to the typesetter. Oh.
yeah, things have changed. So you became a graphic designer on your own at some point.
Yes. Well, at some point I got married and had kids. And it just seemed like the right thing to do to try to be home more than be, always putting the kids in daycare. So I thought I would play my hand at being a freelancer, freelance graphic designer. So I did that. It didn't work so great because you have to kind of have clients before you quit. But it was a good learning experience, and eventually I ended up working for another independently, like an independent contractor. So I became an independent contractor with another gal who was the independent contractor for other businesses while I had my babies. So, you just do what you have to do. And, I did what I needed to do, and I stayed positive, and, things worked out. It takes time, but eventually I started landing the clients and getting jobs that were more predictable and were chunky, big ones that could take care of, a couple months worth of expenses. And then gradually I didn't have to work for anyone in particular. I could just bring the work to me, and then I was in charge of all that.
So you're a freelance graphic designer. You got a couple of babies at home. And then one day the light bulb goes off and says, I don't need to do graphic design anymore. I'm going to do paintings. Is that what happened?
Well, the light bulb was slowly
A little dim?
inching up a little bit. It's kind of like on the rheostat. It was taking some time. So even while I was doing my graphic design, whether I was working for a company or working for myself, I was always painting. So I forgot to mention that. So even while I was working hard as a graphic designer, I had my little corner in whatever room that was, and I had a painting going. And so I would work toward getting into shows. I belonged to Milwaukee League of Artists, different little art groups in my town, and then that gave us an opportunity to show our artwork.
So how did you learn this skill of painting? Did you study with anyone?
Well, I think in college was probably where I picked up most of my technique by way of an underpainting idea instead of just starting right out on a white canvas. So I picked that up from my painting instructor, Sister Thomasita, at Cardinal Stritch, and learned lots of different ways to approach a canvas. And that also helped me in my graphic design world too, finding different ways to approach a problem, a design problem, an image problem, anything that had to do with how do you make an effective image or a good painting or say something, how do you say it. So I learned so many different ways of tackling that from Sister Thomasita. But I did paint before her too. I mean, as a kid in high school, I set up my little easel outside and did some pretty bad paintings as a youngster. But you do what you can at the time, and
sure.
But college is what gave me some really good tools.
So how do you approach a canvas? Hi, how are you?
I say, hey, you're a little bright, you're blinding me. I need to get rid of all that white on there.
So she taught you how to approach a canvas. You said there were a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
and that those things stuck with you. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to share that might be helpful to people?
Yeah, well, there's more than one way to get rid of the white. I've done a lot of, I've settled in on something that really works for me now, and that's kind of using the opposite color idea, where if the sky is blue, I put an orange underneath it. But, and vice versa for the grass, then it'll probably be red underneath that. But there's so many more ways of doing it. Sister Thomasita had us put tissue paper and glue, like you get your colorful tissue paper and you get this gluey water and you paint it on your canvas. And it has a little wrinkly effect, and it's also color already. So you get a texture and you get a color, and then you start working on top of that. That was cool. We also did spray paint.
Probably didn't have a lot of archival life.
Not so archivally sound, no. In fact, I have old paintings where that tissue paper, you can see the texture, the color is completely gone. It's just, fled. The color went away a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah, it's not peeling yet,
Yeah.
but
Don't do this at home. You could try it, but just understand that it's not going to last for 5,000 years.
Right. So, but thankfully I have good slides of it somewhere, lost somewhere.
So you started to mention another way to approach
Oh yes,
canvas.
so we were encouraged to take light cardboard and cut shapes. So you know what your subject's going to be. Let's say it's a still life. So I'm going to cut the vase, not carefully. I'm going to cut a vase shape, and I'm going to cut some flower shapes, and then on the canvas on the ground, then I'll put these shapes on that canvas and spray with color, move the shapes around, and you have positive and negative shapes. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you can see the subject matter, but it's more abstract approach. It's kind of has a faceted look to it, sometimes a cubist look. That was another way. Now I took that method up until about the mid-90s, and that was how I did my underpaintings for the most part. Now I didn't do the cubistic style. I painted my realistic style on top of that, but I had this really cool underpainting. But after that, the spray paint was just not working for me, because my driveway was getting these funny shapes on it all the time, and and then it's cold. I don't want to go outside and do that, and you sure don't want to do that in your basement. So I graduated to painting my underpainting with paint then. I'm like, well, why don't I just take paint and do that?
So some artists believe that having an underpainting is going to pollute your color or perhaps dull your color, and yet others insist on doing it, sometimes just to cut the brightness out of the white, especially when you're plein air painting, so that you know, because it throws your eyes, it probably makes you close down your irises a little bit more because you're looking at that bright white surface.
Yeah.
Is that why you do it, or you just do it for color harmony?
Well, I do it because it's more fun for me.
That's all that really matters.
It's always been more fun. I've certainly tried a white canvas and painted right on it, and I'm okay with it, but it just isn't as much fun.
Yeah.
So the talk about having an underpainting and then you put your color on top of it and it might get, I don't know what you said, muddy or something. I actually use acrylic paint, and so it won't be picked up by the oil that's going on top. So I won't have a problem with that color bleeding onto the color on top. So it sits on top, but my paint has to be pretty opaque. So there's kind of a discipline when I teach my classes that you know, if you're going to do this, we have to be careful to use it responsibly, because the underpainting can cause problems by way of values. Because you have a white canvas and it's a white, your highest key value, and if you put an underpainting on it, it might be a mid-key value. So if you put a light color on it, you might think it's light enough, but it might not be.
Right.
So I mean, there's challenges in there, and it can also distract. If there's too much bright underpainting showing, it can be distracting. But
well, you can get those little pinholes of white that start showing up in a painting, even after you think you've covered the whole thing. You know, they kind of pop out at you. So when you're using acrylic as an underpainting, you have to put acrylic on acrylic. You can't put acrylic on oil. Is that right?
Right. That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So it's okay to put oil on top of acrylic, but if you have oil under acrylic, the acrylic will
it
come
doesn't
off.
want to stick. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always use a universal primed canvas that will take acrylic paint. I don't start on an oil primed canvas. And I use such a thin, almost like a stain of acrylic on there, so it's not like a really fat plasticky surface. So even so, I imagine in 500 years, maybe my paintings will all fall off the canvas. I don't know. I'm hoping they don't, and you know, I won't be around to be sued or anything, but
Well, I don't know. You know, with your grandmother's genes,
oh boy,
you never know. Things are changing.
That's true.
Well, you know, there's that story about Odd Nerdrum, and Odd Nerdrum he used acrylic house paint as his underpainting, and these would sit in the apartments of New York over the radiators, and then the paintings just slid off. So
Okay.
you have to be sensitive to
Yeah,
that.
so we won't be using really thick acrylic paint.
No, you don't want to use real thick acrylic paint for that reason, and you want something with some tooth in it so it doesn't slide off. Okay, well, we got way off track, didn't we?
A little.
So going back to I want to just kind of finish up a little of the history, and then we'll get into some other things. So you're raising these kids. You were always painting on the side, even when you were doing graphics. But when did you make the transition to being a person who is able to maybe take a step out, make a living as a fine art painter?
Well, it was gradual, like I said, and I was self-employed graphic designer, so I already had some business acumen. You know, I knew how to deal with clients and ask for the money, you know, bill them. So I had corporate art consultants find my work when I was hanging in those little shows. So I've hung in group shows, I've hung in cafes, and you know, when you're young and you're getting started, you just get your work out in front of people, right?
Right, very important.
It happened that I had the right people get in front of my paintings, and then I was asked to do custom work for corporations. So it was probably in the early mid-90s and starting the late 90s, where I was getting a lot of work like that. I was getting jobs.
These were
commissions.
local corporations?
Yep, people in Milwaukee. So I was
And they
getting
wanted the paintings for what?
their boardroom or a lobby area, and I was by that time specializing in painting urban landscape, in other words, Milwaukee paintings. And everybody loves to see their hometown of Milwaukee. And so that was getting the attention of certain corporate art representatives who were like, hey, I got somebody who could, I bet this company would really like, and so that ball started rolling. And that's a hit or miss ball. I mean, it happens in fits and starts. I can get a ton of work doing that and then nothing. But at a certain point I would say about 2003, I got a really big gig at a country club where I was asked to paint 18 paintings, 3 of which were 3 by 5 feet. And the rest of them were 18 by 24, all of Ozaukee County, which is a neighboring county near Milwaukee. And that was big money for me. And I was also doing my graphic design business, and I was like, okay, that's really cool. I think I'm making more money doing paintings this year than doing graphics. And so I kept getting more great jobs like that. And then right around, I would have to say a couple of years after that, I was also teaching workshops, by the way. That was part of, I was starting to be asked to teach workshops, so that was part of the income pot as well as an artist. But at a certain point, the graphic design world was getting into making, if you wanted to be a successful graphic designer, you had to be able to make websites. You had to be able to do moving graphics, animations, and stuff like that. And I was still kind of, I could do stuff on the computer, but I'm like, do I want to spend time learning how to do HTML language in front of a screen? And I decided instead of doing that, I am going to invest my time in myself and pursue being a fine artist. And that was taking the leap. Basically, it got to the point where I was making more money being a fine artist than a graphic designer. I was losing my graphic designer clients because they were bringing their graphic design jobs in-house because everybody could do their own newsletters now.
Right.
So that happened, and then I started doing more art fairs. That's the other part of it.
So I think that, I think you did it right. I mean, I don't know that there's a right or a wrong, but in my art marketing courses, I teach about the transition. So you transition out of one into the other, and when the money crosses, you wait till you've got some security. You wait till it's happened a few times so that you go, this is not an anomaly. And then you can, by the time you're making more money on this side, then the other one can completely go away. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's essentially what it is.
That's like a graphic. You've just kind of put a picture on that.
Yeah. So what was the turning point when you knew that you were good enough? Because our heads kind of get in our way sometimes.
Well, I don't know if there's a turning point with that in particular. It was more about, do I have the fortitude to do this? Not so much am I good enough to make this work, but do I have the guts to do it? Because, having these 2 boys that, raising pretty much, by myself. I mean, they have a dad too, but pretty much they're with me most of the time, and I have to go to school with them and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And I mean, there was a lot of distracting, very, very good reasons to be distracted from making artwork, being a mom and all. But I had to decide that I could do this thing and that I have the faith. Basically, I have faith that what I'm doing, which is my passion, what I'm doing that gives me joy and that feeds my family, is going to keep coming to me. Right. And I guess the examples of that working were coming in on a somewhat regular basis.
Well, and you really at that point, once you kind of pulled the trigger on the other business, you had no choice but to make it work.
Yes, although I could have gone back out and done graphic design, but I didn't want to. Yeah, and then it was, I mean, there were definitely, you know, doing art fairs that put some regular income in there.
Local art fairs?
No, that's when I bought a van in 1995. I started doing the art fairs before I went completely solo on the fine art. And I started doing art fairs out of Milwaukee because I figured I need to have a bigger audience.
Right.
So I've done the Cherry Creek one, I've done one in Miami, I did some, you know, in the Midwest and stuff like that.
How did you do art fairs when you had 2 boys at home?
Mom, will you come and babysit? Or they went with their dad, you know. I mean, it was definitely a doable thing. But my mom definitely came and helped me out a few times.
So what was the biggest lesson you learned from doing art fairs?
Wow. Keeping a positive attitude, because that's a grueling way to go. It can be really grueling. It can be awesome and you can just sell a lot and make a lot of money on a weekend, but it can also be one of those things where you're standing around waiting for somebody to buy something and they all have nice things to say, and just keeping that voice inside your head from going cynical. That's a tough one, you know.
Right.
And you know, and it's funny because after a while then I decided, you know what, I don't need to do art fairs anymore. So I graduated from that too in the last few years. So I'm not doing art fairs anymore either.
So what do you think was after the art fair point, what was the biggest turning point in your career? Can you identify a moment when everything really changed?
Wow, well, I think it you know, it's not a huge, like, momentous occasion. Again, I have to say it was a gradual, but there were definitely peaks and spikes. Mm-hmm. So I think getting the award, the Plein Air Magazine Salon Award in 2013 was really great. That really boosted my image in the world of artists. More people came to know who I was as an artist. So I went from being pretty much successful in my little local area, very successful in Milwaukee, and then getting some success a little bit outside there, to like, I'm going to these conventions because I need to meet some artists. I need to meet some people around them. I need to expand. And so I went to the first one, and you know, and then I entered those contests, and then the second one, I go and I find out that I get the award. I'm like, what? I mean, that's a whole nother story all by itself. But,
well, let's talk about it, because I think it's really fascinating. Because you went from being, I think in your words, you went from being a local artist to becoming a nationally known, nationally recognized artist because of that one thing. Yeah,
I think because of making my decision to spend the money to go and be with a bunch of other artists, and starting to, now I knew some of them before because I had started doing the plein air competitions, the one in Door County in particular, because that's in the neck of my neck of the woods. So I knew like Mark Hansen and just a bunch of other really great people. So when I went to the first convention, I actually recognized and knew some, but I'm like, I need to know more people.
Why was that important to you?
I just was ready for the next step. I wanted to do more travel, and I wanted to make new friends, and just see how the other guys are doing it. You know, how are these painters who are up on the stage? How are they doing it? You know, what makes them tick? How did they get where they're at? And I can do that too, by golly. So. So, you know, and when you opened up the competition, I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to take a chance on this, you know. I know that as an artist, you enter a lot of things, and I know that you don't always win, and you got to just keep putting it out there, putting it out there, putting it out there. And I had absolutely no idea. You know, when I got the final, to be a finalist was shock number one, you know, when the finalists of the bi-monthly thing. So that was totally shocking.
So what I think is interesting about it, though, is it gives you outside validation.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Sometimes I'm too close to it. I don't even see what it is that I'm trying to say, and that's what it is. And I keep trying to be not letting ego be the motivator for things, but you can't help it. We all got an ego. So some part of me wants to get more in front of people and share. So I want to be up there on the stage and share, because I love to share, and I love watching other people share what they do, because we all have something a little unique, and so I don't know, it just seemed like a fun thing to go out there and do that, and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, well, you put yourself out there.
Yeah.
You said to your, I don't know if you mentally said this to yourself, but when you entered the salon, you put yourself out there. You said, I'm going to see how I measure up against other people. And then you ended up winning it. What was it like? So here you are, you're in the audience, you're surrounded by people who you probably think are better than you. What was it like to have your name called?
Well, do you want the honest answer?
Yeah.
Well, I was to do a performance art piece on the demo stage, and I didn't have my big canvas for that, which was supposed to happen that afternoon, so I had to go to an art supply store. So I was out getting my canvas, and then I had to eat some breakfast, so I went to the McDonald's drive-thru, and I got a call from one of my art friends, "You have to get down here! You won it!" I'm like, what? What?
So you weren't even sitting in the audience.
I wasn't in the audience. I was like, no. Yeah. And then another person texted me too and said this, "You have to get down here now. Get down here now." I'm like, and then, you know, of course this is in Monterey, and I'm not that familiar with the turf there. So I was like, I don't know if I can drive back without getting in an accident. This is scary. How do I get back? How do I get back? You know, I did get back in one piece, and then of course I come running in, jumping up and down, and I think I don't remember who corralled me, and you know, the rest is history. But yeah, I was mortified that I wasn't there, though. I mean, I was like, oh, of all times for me to not be there. But
So you probably didn't even believe you were going to win it.
no, not at all. I did no, because if I would have like gone, okay, so chances are I better make sure I'm there. Just
So what I think is curious is that you knew that the salon was there were people entering the salon who had national reputations, who were good painters. Why even bother entering when you know what you're up against?
Well, all I can say is it can't hurt to try. And at the time I thought, well, do I think my work is any less good than somebody else? And why would I think that a judge over here who has totally different taste buds than a judge over here who has other kind of taste buds and qualifications and what he or she considers to be good, why wouldn't I work in that pool? Why can't I jump in the pool with the rest of the guys and the girls? So that's kind of how I look at it. And you know what? It's only money, and it's money well spent when you enter shows and stuff like that. And it's also tax deductible. I've learned that through the years as a self-employed person. All that stuff's tax deductible.
Well, you ended up on the cover of a national magazine. What happened then?
Well, you know, I got phone calls from a couple of different galleries, and eventually even got on the cover of another magazine.
There are no other magazines.
But, you know, I won't name the magazine. But, I mean, I think because it was so visible, you know, and I just think you guys are so good at reminding people at how great this is that we're out there, that my face didn't just show up that one month. I was holding that check all over the place. So anyway, it was great exposure, and so many artists, more artists wanted to take my classes. So I had, you know, more workshop attendees, more people asking me to teach as well. So it was a nice boost, definitely.
So tell me what happened after that in terms of your career. You've been doing teaching. You're in more galleries. It seems like you've become very, very successful.
Well, I think what's been happening is I'm continuing to ride that wave of being asked to do really great plein air invitationals, and juried ones. Obviously, those are juried, but the invitationals have a special panache, and being able to go to those has been great, which puts me in front of an audience of another caliber of artists too that I've been able to rub elbows with. I have made some great friends that I never thought I would, and I also feel like I have a place I can go and travel and stay anywhere in the United States.
Right.
I don't know why I ever bought a timeshare. What a waste of money. Because now I can stay for free probably all over the country.
Yeah.
But so basically, and my career is still going good in Milwaukee. I still have work in Milwaukee too. I still have companies wanting my paintings and patrons, in my local area. So I just feel like my world is more expanded now.
Well, you're an overnight success in Milwaukee, right? So you've been painting now for many, 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 many years, probably a couple of decades. I don't know how long that span of period is, but when you invest, get involved in that community, that people get to know you, that just snowballs, and you've got that momentum. And you're smart because you now have two strategies. You have a local strategy, which you've continued, and you have a national strategy, which allows you to get out into a different marketplace, get out into the plein air world, work the events, and so on. And that way, if one, heaven forbid, falls for some reason, at least you've got something else to fall back on.
Yes. And my dream is to be that traveler, I mean, I'm already living the dream, but I think, people ask me about retirement, what's that? Because I'll be painting as long as I can lift a paintbrush. But my retirement, when that is, will be, I will then choose what I want to paint and not paint what I think somebody else wants me to paint. So it's a balance there too, as a professional painter. I'm painting to make a living, but it's also my passion. So when I have a commission, I may not necessarily choose to paint that particular building because I'd really rather paint something really rusty and crusty over here. But when I retire, that means I'll have enough confidence and enough wherewithal and a plan to not have to take on even the commission work, which is still painting.
Or to be able to say, I'll choose which ones I want to take because
yes.
I don't want to paint that new, nice, shiny building. I want to paint this. I'll take on this commission, getting that crusty old building.
Yes, choice. It's all about choice.
So looking back now, what have been, other than what we've discussed, any particular highlights in your career?
Wow. Well, I'm still working on that. There's been so many good things that's happened to me. I've had a couple of different great studio showrooms in Milwaukee that I've had wonderful times in, and I've had great events in those studios, and hosted, multimedia things and stuff like that. So those were highlights in my life, being able to do that. And now I just have a small condo and a little studio in my condo, which is lovely because I can just lock and leave and travel all around the country.
Perfect for your lifestyle.
Perfect for my lifestyle. So, it's funny that I can't come up with anything besides getting that award and getting that magazine cover over there and being invited to different being a part of museum shows. I'm in a Cowgirl Up show coming up. That's pretty impressive and exciting to me. There are these wonderful light-filled events that continue to come my way. And maybe tonight I'll go, oh, that was the highlight I should have thought of. But definitely winning that award was huge on the stage at the Plein Air Salon Award. And hopefully there'll be more fun things like that.
Oh, of course there will.
Yeah.
Of course there will. So I love the fact that you're kind of an architectural painter. You know, a lot of us are drawn to the landscape. The landscape for you is the urban scene and the architecture. Do you ever do landscape paintings, or is it mostly just architecture?
I do landscape paintings, and I love being outside, and I love being in the fresh air and hearing the bugs and not feeling the bugs. But I love being outside and painting the landscape, but I'm just more happy when I can hang some paint on the side of a building. There's something about the solidity of a building and the perspective that's involved and the detail that's involved with that. But more than anything, it's the compositional possibilities when you paint a building. So I like to think of a painting as being successful if it would work as a strong abstract. So buildings are definite shapes, and so I like to do unexpected compositions with those shapes of a building. And I love what light does when it hits buildings. So I guess that's what gets me most excited, is being able to catch a building in a dramatic situation, lighting-wise, or something like that.
I personally find buildings very hard to paint. I love to paint buildings, I love to paint architecture, but they always look too stiff or too perfect or something. As a matter of fact, I'm struggling with a painting right now of a building that it's just driving me nuts because there's something wrong with it. Is there anything you can share with us that you've kind of discovered that might be helpful to kind of make architecture make sense for all of us?
Well, you know, if you have a basic knowledge of one-point perspective, two-point perspective, or whatever, vanishing points, you don't have to have it so well ingrained that you can draw a perfect rendering on your canvas. But if you have the idea and you know that there's a point way over there where these lines have to converge, you can start telling your brain and your eye to work together, because sometimes one or the other, they kind of fight a little bit. And slight angles are even harder to do than those severe angles because you're not sure what you're seeing.
Right.
So I suggest to people who want to do architecture but want to keep it simple is to do a straight on one. Don't put perspective, do something straight on, make it a design, a nice shape, and make that fit in the canvas in an interesting composition, and start from there. Mm-hmm. And make those windows smaller than they look. Always make those windows a little smaller. For some reason, it's just a more compelling thing if you have a little window, or if there's a bunch of windows, make them a little smaller. I mean, there's little tips like that I share with my students. But buildings can also be as rough and free as, you know, so I like to say, the looser you are, the more you can get away with. So if you're a loose painter and you're just banging it out, bam, 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 and the whole thing is loose, you can get away with a lot of mistakes in
now
perspective.
I know my problem. Oh, that's terrific. Well, you were like a kid in a candy store when we went to Cuba together.
Oh yes.
Because the buildings, you didn't have to add patina; they had them already.
Yeah, that was the dream come true. I have more materials from the photos I took. I have more painting subjects waiting for me to do. I want to go back, don't get me wrong, but I could spend a lifetime doing paintings from that trip, just from the photos I got.
So talk to us about photos versus painting in person.
Oh.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. There's a lot of information out there that says that you can't make a good painting from a photograph, that a photograph is too flat, you don't get any color differentiation, it's too static, all of this stuff. And I understand that, but I also think that if you have a good imagination and an ability to see beyond what you're just seeing in a photograph, that you can make that photograph into a really terrific painting. And having plein air painting experience has made me a better painter of photographs. So I recommend to people, if they want to make good paintings from photographs, you still need to go outside and paint from life.
So could you articulate that a little bit
Yeah.
more? I certainly know what you're talking about, but I think they need to hear it from you. Why is it important? What is it that you cannot see in a photograph that you will see when you're plein air painting?
The biggest example I can give is distance. When you think about, well, since I do buildings a lot, we'll just say that. I've got a building, a barn in the foreground, and then in the background, there's this line of woods back there. In a photograph, that line of woods is probably going to be almost, if not the same darkness as the trees that are up in front and the dark areas that are closer to you. So a photo tends to just generalize that, and it kind of forces a high contrast. So when I'm out there in the field painting, I can see a lot more atmosphere. I can see much more subtlety and distance. I can see more color in that distance. And so I know that when I bring my painting to the studio, when I start painting from a photo in the studio, I don't have to be a slave to that photograph. I can push that distance back with my blues and my purples and lighten it up so it doesn't have to be exactly like what the photo looks like. Mm-hmm. That's probably the best example for how you can fix.
Photos lie. Shadows are always darker than they actually appear in life. So many things about it.
Lots of things. And there's lots of ways to exaggerate color that you sort of see in a photograph. I'm really good at picking out something I think I'm seeing in that photograph, although if you held it back here, you wouldn't see anything but white. So if I see a teeny hint of a purple, I'm going to play that up. And that's how, now I've been doing probably more paintings from photographs in my early career than now. Now it's about half and half. But in my early career, I was solely painting from photographs, and they were bright, colorful paintings. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't look like a photo at all, actually. But I was a little crazier too. I left a lot more underpainting showing, and and we all grow up a little bit in our technique.
So talk to me about growth, because I think that's something that you've exhibited. You don't let any grass grow under your feet. You're always out there trying to learn more. Tell me more about that and why that's important.
Well, I always think that we're never done. We're never finished learning. And I always want to get better. I always want to be a better painter. And so I've taken classes from other artists. I've taken from Jill Carver, from some other folks too, and I will continue to go toward people that motivate me. Mm-hmm. So having done that, even taking classes from people like Jill Carver, I've learned to be a better teacher as well, because they are great teachers. And so I think that my painting has improved as my communication skills in all realms. The paint is your communication skill, and how you talk about what you're doing while you're painting, that's also a skill. And I just think now I'm learning that by upping my game, by just looking at artists' work, just looking at the beauty and the thickness of the paint and the brush strokes and all that, I'm upping my game by feeding myself these paintings, continually feeding what I'm seeing and going, now I wonder if I can just be a little better at doing this thing, say more with less. So I'm going to keep trying.
So one thing we haven't talked about is your music. You went on stage at the Plein Air Convention, and you were challenged to paint a very large canvas in a very short amount of time. And you put on this amazing music, and you said you composed it yourself. So you're composing music on top of composing paintings.
Yes, I've been a visual artist, but I've also been a musician ever since high school, ever since a kid, I guess. And there was something missing in my life. Even though I was having a great time being a painter, I missed music. And I know I'll never be a soloist of any kind. You know, I love singing, and I love playing an instrument, but the solo thing just wasn't going to happen. But I also love beats. So through the years, I've gone to raves and done some fun, funky things, you know, and listened to that really great electronic music. And I realized that I can actually make that stuff because there's software on a Mac that allows you to make stuff. So I think it was in 2008, I sat down and taught myself how to make music using GarageBand. And so I make what I called sound collage because, you know, I wasn't actually playing those instruments. I was taking bits and pieces like visual collage artists do and make a composition. So it's a composition, but it's an audio composition. So I was doing that from probably like 2008 until, you know, pretty much the present. And I get so much enjoyment out of that. And I was doing these performance art paintings now it's been about a dozen years when I've been doing those. And I had been using a segment of music from an existing DJ, strung 5 songs together. And I thought, why am I using somebody else's music for that? I'm going to make a piece that I can use to do in my own little show. And so that's what you heard and saw.
Well, it's very good.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun. And I'm getting back into it. I kind of took a hiatus there for a while because, you know, you can't do everything. And now I'm getting back into doing more compositions that are me actually playing the piano and then building a song off of that. Wow. So, yeah.
Well, you've done a beautiful job so far, and I'm very impressed with what's happened in your career, and I'm very impressed with your work. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's been my pleasure.
Shelby Keefe is a creative genius. That was Painting from Photographs with Shelby Keefe. You can learn more about the video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code for you today only. It's in the comments section. Look for that. Also, we have a free 2-hour video valued at over $100. It's 97 amazing painting secrets from the world's best artists. We combined many of our top videos and put them together so you can get a good sample of them. It's found at 97tips.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at 3 p.m. tomorrow. I'm Eric Rhodes.
For over 100 years, artists have relied on photographs as a reference for paintings. But photographs lie. They make shadows too dark, they make skies too light, they show values incorrectly, and they misrepresent the colors you see in real life. Gallery owners and professional painters can walk into a room and point out which paintings were done from photographs. The key to painting from photos is to learn how to overcome the things that normally make paintings look like they are painted from photos, and to create more interest, more drama, and more color. Learning to paint what you see in a photograph is one of the most effective ways to improve your skills as an artist. Now you can create amazing paintings without fear of criticism for using photos, and discover the techniques to make great, lively paintings that are truly not just copies of photographs. In this all-new video, critically acclaimed artist Shelby Keefe shares with you all of her most effective techniques for creating beautiful paintings from photographs. You'll discover when to paint exactly what you see in a photo and when you can run wild with your imagination and become more expressive in your work. How to create a musical sense of rhythm in the paintings you create from photographs. What you need to understand about color family values and how they affect the overall appearance of your final painting. You'll learn how to find the focal point of your composition and how to make it stand out for the viewer. You'll also discover how to simplify the entire painting process by using line work to create an easy step-by-step roadmap to follow. 5 hours of techniques, a rare opportunity to learn from a highly sought-after artist. You'll gain valuable insights that will help you take your work to the next level, whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced painter. Painting from Photographs with Shelby Keefe is now available on video.